Pearl Harbor. Just after 7:30 on a clear Hawaiian morning, two privates manning radar at Opana Point saw something unusual. A large formation, more than 50 miles out, moving fast toward Oahu. They called it in. The duty officer told them not to worry. Probably B-17s from the mainland. By 8, the first wave was overhead. 14 parts of a Japanese diplomatic message had been intercepted and decoded in the days before. It clearly severed relations. The message reached the President, the Secretary of State, Naval Intelligence. It did not reach commanders in Hawaii until too late. Tokyo had ordered its embassy to destroy code machines. Japanese carriers had gone radio silent. A Japanese submarine was sunk outside Pearl Harbor hours before the planes arrived. Each piece sat in a different building, held by a different agency, viewed through different assumptions. The Army thought the Navy was watching the seas. The Navy thought the Army was defending the base. Neither had a complete picture. There was no centralized intelligence organization. No one whose job was to assemble the fragments. Over 2,000 Americans died. The Pacific Fleet was crippled. The answer led directly to the CIA in 1947, designed to prevent another Pearl Harbor by breaking down walls between military and civilian intelligence. The Gulf of Tonkin. August 2, 1964. The USS Maddox, conducting signals intelligence in the Gulf of Tonkin, reported being attacked by North Vietnamese torpedo boats. The attack was real. Maddox returned fire. 2 nights later, in rough seas and darkness, Maddox and the USS Turner Joy reported a second attack. Sonar heard torpedoes. Radar showed enemy vessels. The ships fired hundreds of rounds for over 2 hours. There were no enemy boats. There was no second attack. The sonar readings were echoes from their own propellers. The radar contacts were weather and wave clutter. The Maddox commander sent a message within hours urging Washington to slow down, suggesting the engagement might have been imagined. That message reached the Pentagon. It reached the White House. It was set aside. President Johnson announced American ships had been attacked without provocation. He asked Congress for authorization to repel aggression. 3 days later, Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. It became the legal foundation for a war that killed 58,000 Americans and over 1 million Vietnamese. NSA analysts had doubts about the second attack within days. Some expressed them. But momentum was unstoppable. It wasn't a technology failure. It was unwillingness to accept inconvenient uncertainty. The system wanted certainty. So it created it. The Iran-Contra Affair. In 1982, Congress passed the Boland Amendment. No U.S. funds could overthrow Nicaragua's government. The CIA was ordered to stop arming Contra rebels. The operation didn't stop. It went underground. A small group inside the National Security Council, led by Marine Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, began running an off-the-books covert operation. They sold weapons to Iran, a hostile nation under arms embargo. Profits were funneled to the Contras. The CIA wasn't running it. Congress didn't know. Even parts of the executive branch were kept dark. It was intelligence designed to bypass intelligence oversight. When a plane carrying weapons was shot down over Nicaragua and the survivor talked, the structure unraveled. Documents were shredded. Stories coordinated. But the paper trail was too extensive. Congressional hearings in 1987 exposed everything. North testified in uniform, defended his actions as patriotic. To others, he represented a system so convinced of its righteousness it broke the law to achieve policy goals elected representatives had rejected. 14 charged. 11 convicted, though most overturned on technicalities. The real damage was institutional. If a small group could run entire covert foreign policy without oversight, what did oversight mean? Able Archer 83. November 1983. NATO began Able Archer 83, a command exercise simulating transition from conventional warfare to nuclear release. Encrypted communications. Force mobilization. Practice orders sent through the chain of command to simulated launch codes. In Moscow, it looked real. Soviet intelligence had been told to watch for first strike signs. Their leadership believed Reagan might be aggressive enough to attempt decapitation. NATO rhetoric had been harsh. New intermediate-range missiles were deploying in Europe. Now NATO was switching communication frequencies, moving mock nuclear weapons, activating dormant command centers. The KGB sent a flash alert: this might not be a drill. Soviet nuclear forces went to higher alert. Bombers were fueled. Missile crews on standby. The world was closer to accidental nuclear war than any point since Cuba. The American intelligence community had no idea. There was no human intelligence inside the Kremlin's inner circle. The CIA focused on technical collection, satellites, signals intercepts, measuring missile production. They could count Soviet tanks. They couldn't read Soviet minds. When NATO finished and stood down, Soviet forces quietly did the same. The crisis passed without Washington knowing there had been a crisis. Not until 1990, when KGB defector Oleg Gordievsky told his story, did the full scope become clear. Reagan read the reports and was shaken. You can have all the satellites in the world and still be blind to the one thing that matters most: intent. Beirut Barracks. October 23, 1983. A yellow Mercedes truck accelerated through a barbed wire fence at Beirut International Airport. Inside the converted terminal, 350 Marines were sleeping. Just after 6 a.m., the truck crashed into the building's lobby. 12,000 pounds of explosives detonated. The four-story structure collapsed in seconds. 241 Americans died. The warnings had been explicit. Weeks before, the CIA reported Iranian-backed groups were planning a spectacular strike. The exact word in classified briefings: massive. Truck bombs were the preferred weapon. The Marines were a likely target. The response was inadequate. Concrete barriers were positioned decoratively, not defensively. Rules of engagement prohibited sentries from keeping loaded weapons. The concern was avoiding incidents with civilians. The trade-off was leaving Marines unable to stop a vehicle at speed. The attack was meticulously planned. The truck carried a shaped charge designed to collapse structures. This wasn't a state military. It was a non-state actor, willing to die, using asymmetric tactics that made physical security almost meaningless. 3 minutes later, a second truck bomb hit a French parachutist building, killing 58. Coordinated. The groups responsible became Hezbollah. The lesson was written in rubble, but it would take 2 decades and thousands more deaths before American intelligence fully restructured to fight enemies without flags or capitals. The Lockerbie Miss. December 21, 1988. Pan Am Flight 103 took off from London's Heathrow at 6 p.m., bound for New York. 38 minutes later, at 31,000 feet over Lockerbie, Scotland, a bomb detonated in the forward cargo hold. The plane disintegrated. All 259 aboard died, along with 11 on the ground. American intelligence had been warned. 2 weeks earlier, a man called the U.S. Embassy in Helsinki with a specific threat: a bomb would be placed on a Pan Am flight from Frankfurt to the United States within 2 weeks. Details about the method and airline. Credible enough that State Department issued an internal security bulletin to embassies, telling personnel to avoid that route. The general public was not informed. Pan Am was not required to increase security. Passengers had no idea. The reasoning: intelligence too vague to act on, and publicizing every threat would create panic. After Lockerbie, investigators traced the bomb to Libyan intelligence. It had been placed in a suitcase in Malta, transferred through Frankfurt, loaded in London. The Helsinki warning was unrelated to the actual attack. But that didn't change the ethical failure. Someone called with a specific threat about Pan Am from Frankfurt. A Pan Am flight from Frankfurt was destroyed. And ticket buyers were never told they were flying into known risk. Who decides what the public knows about dangers they face? And when those decisions are wrong, who is accountable? The USS Cole. October 12, 2000. The USS Cole, a guided missile destroyer, pulled into Aden, Yemen for routine refueling. Part of a new policy: use Yemeni ports to build regional relationships. The ship moored just before noon. Two men in a small fiberglass boat approached the hull. It looked like a harbor service craft. The boat came alongside. The men stood up. The explosion tore a 40 by 60-foot hole in the port side. 17 sailors killed instantly, most in the dining hall. 39 wounded. The boat had been packed with explosives in a shaped charge. Al-Qaeda operation. Planned by the same people who would, 11 months later, carry out September 11th. Intelligence warnings about Yemen had been consistent and urgent. CIA knew Al-Qaeda had presence there. The previous year, another attempted boat bombing against a Navy vessel had failed only because the attacker's boat, overloaded, sank before reaching its target. That earlier attempt was known. It was in the briefings. The decision to use Aden continued anyway. The calculation, relationship-building benefit outweighed risk. The Cole's crew wasn't on heightened alert. Rules of engagement for refueling didn't include treating harbor boats as threats. Al-Qaeda operatives had surveilled the port for months. Rented a house overlooking the harbor. Tested explosives remotely. Waited for a high-value target. The response from Washington was muted. Election year. Treated as a criminal matter, not an act of war. Enemies adapt faster than bureaucracies. Less than a year later, that gap between knowing and acting would produce a failure so immense it would redefine the century. The Millennium Plot. December 14, 1999. Ahmed Ressam, an Algerian man, drove off a ferry in Port Angeles, Washington. A customs inspector noticed he seemed nervous. She asked him to step out. In the trunk, timing devices, fertilizer-based explosives, enough materials to level a building. Ressam had been sent by Al-Qaeda to bomb Los Angeles International Airport during Millennium celebrations. He was arrested on the spot. Clean intelligence success. Customs did its job. Further investigation disrupted a series of planned attacks, including plots in Jordan. The FBI and CIA coordinated, sharing information in a way that actually worked. The system blinked red. Someone paid attention. But success bred complacency. The millennium passed without major attack on American soil. The sense of urgency faded. Counterterrorism units went back to normal staffing. Budgets reduced. The thinking, never stated but clearly present, the threat had been overhyped. The intelligence community cried wolf, and the wolf hadn't come. Except the wolf had come. It had just been stopped at the door. Ressam's arrest should have warned that Al-Qaeda had capability, planning, and will to carry out mass casualty attacks inside the United States. Instead, it was treated as proof the existing system was good enough. The near miss didn't prompt fundamental restructuring. It prompted relief. By summer 2001, that relief had calcified into routine. Threat reports were coming in at unprecedented levels. The system was blinking red again, but this time there was no nervous suspect at a checkpoint. This time, there would be no customs agent to stop it. 9/11. August 6, 2001. The President's daily brief contained a section titled, Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S. A page and a half. It mentioned FBI information indicating patterns consistent with hijacking preparations. It noted Bin Laden wanted to conduct attacks inside the United States. 5 weeks later, 19 men boarded 4 airplanes and killed nearly 3,000 people. The failures were systemic, layered, maddeningly preventable. In July, an FBI agent in Phoenix sent a memo warning that unusual numbers of Middle Eastern men were enrolling in flight schools. The memo suggested investigating whether this could be coordinated by Bin Laden. It was filed and not acted upon. In August, another FBI agent in Minnesota arrested Zacharias Moussaoui, who'd been taking flight lessons and asking suspicious questions about steering large aircraft. The agent requested a warrant to search Moussaoui's laptop. FBI headquarters denied it, saying evidence didn't meet legal threshold. The laptop contained contact information for several hijackers. The CIA knew 2 hijackers, Khalid al-Midhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, were in the United States. They'd been tracked to a terrorist summit in Malaysia in January 2000, identified as Al-Qaeda operatives, then lost. CIA didn't tell FBI they were in the country until late August. By then, the men had been living openly in San Diego for over a year, using real names, listed in the phone book. The wall between CIA and FBI, built after decades of scandals, was designed to protect civil liberties. It also prevented sharing tactical information that might have connected the dots. The Pentagon burned. The towers fell. The system had all the information it needed. It simply couldn't, or wouldn't, act on it. The aftermath brought complete restructuring. Department of Homeland Security created. CIA and FBI ordered to cooperate. Surveillance powers expanded dramatically. A new doctrine took hold, never again. The next threat would be met with preemption, even if intelligence was less than certain. That doctrine would be tested within 2 years. Iraqi WMDs. March 19, 2003. The United States invaded Iraq based on the assertion that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction and posed imminent threat. The evidence was specific: mobile biological weapons labs, chemical stockpiles, a reconstituted nuclear program. None of it was true. The primary source for mobile weapons labs was an Iraqi defector codenamed Curveball. He'd approached German intelligence in 1999 claiming to be a chemical engineer who worked on mobile bioweapons facilities. Detailed descriptions. Diagrams. His information became the centerpiece of the case for war. German intelligence repeatedly told CIA they considered Curveball unreliable, possibly alcoholic, likely a fabricator. The warnings were in cables. American officers weren't allowed to interview him directly. When a CIA officer finally met him in 2000, he came away with serious doubts and reported them. The doubts were ignored. The Office of Special Plans, a Pentagon unit, bypassed traditional intelligence review, cherry-picked information fitting the desired narrative, and sidelined skeptical analysts. The Department of Energy concluded aluminum tubes Iraq purchased weren't suitable for uranium enrichment. Their assessment was buried. When Colin Powell presented the case to the UN in February 2003, he cited Curveball's claims as fact. After invasion, inspectors found nothing. Curveball eventually admitted fabricating everything to help topple Saddam and secure asylum. The system didn't just get facts wrong. It actively suppressed dissenting views and shaped intelligence to support predetermined policy. That's not analysis. That's advocacy. Over 4,000 American service members died in Iraq. The war cost trillions, destabilized an entire region, created power vacuums that gave rise to ISIS. Fort Hood. November 5, 2009. Major Nidal Hassan, a U.S. Army psychiatrist, walked into the Soldier Readiness Processing Center at Fort Hood, Texas, shouted a phrase, and opened fire. 13 killed, 32 wounded before being shot and paralyzed by a civilian police officer. The warning signs had been visible for months. Hassan had been in email contact with Anwar al-Awlaki, a radical cleric in Yemen actively recruiting for al-Qaeda. FBI intercepted at least 18 emails. In them, Hassan asked about the permissibility of killing American soldiers in the context of jihad. Unambiguous content. FBI reviewed the emails, consulted with Defense Department, and decided the communications were consistent with Hassan's job as a psychiatrist researching soldier mental health. They closed the investigation. The reality was more complicated. FBI was operating under intense pressure to avoid racial or religious profiling accusations. After September 11, there had been lawsuits, public criticism, internal directives warning against targeting individuals based on religion. Fear of discrimination complaint outweighed red flags. Hassan had also given a presentation arguing Muslims in U.S. military could be conflicted between faith and duty. References to jihad. Suggestions adverse events could occur. Supervisors found it concerning but took no formal action. He was about to deploy to Afghanistan. The assumption, his views, while troubling, didn't constitute a threat. The attack forced reckoning with a new vulnerability: the homegrown extremist. Not a foreign operative. Not someone needing to be smuggled in. Just an American citizen, or legal resident, radicalized online and willing to act. A problem intelligence agencies were built to look outward for, not inward. The Benghazi Attack. September 11, 2012. The anniversary of the deadliest terrorist attack in American history. In Benghazi, Libya, a diplomatic compound housing the U.S. ambassador came under assault. Over 7 hours, 2 separate facilities were attacked. 4 Americans died, including Ambassador Chris Stevens. The intelligence breakdown began long before that night. In the months leading up, security assessments for Benghazi were grim. Local militias unreliable. Extremist groups active. Previous attacks on Western targets, including an IED thrown at the compound in June. Requests for additional security personnel were denied. State Department cited budget constraints and desire to maintain low profile. On the attack night, the initial assault on the main compound began around 9:30 p.m. Calls for help went out immediately. A security team from the nearby CIA annex responded within minutes. But there was no quick reaction force close enough to make a difference. Nearest significant U.S. military assets were hours away. The attack unfolded in 2 phases. By the time military assets could arrive, the attack was over. The intelligence failure was about posture. The compound was in a city CIA assessments flagged as increasingly dangerous, on a symbolically significant date, with inadequate security, and no rapid response plan. That's policy failure informed by intelligence either ignored or deemed acceptable risk. The political aftermath focused on talking points. For days, administration officials described the attack as spontaneous protest over an anti-Muslim video. Intelligence suggested otherwise. Within 24 hours, analysts believed it was planned terrorism. Intelligence can warn of a threat. It cannot force policymakers to act. The Snowden Breach. June 2013. A 29-year-old contractor working for NSA walked out of a facility in Hawaii with over 1 million classified documents on portable drives. Edward Snowden. Within weeks, the most sensitive details of American intelligence operations were being published worldwide. The breach exposed NSA surveillance scope, collection of phone metadata on millions of Americans, internet communications interception through partnerships with tech companies, monitoring of foreign leaders, including allies, the largest unauthorized disclosure of classified information in history. The security failure was elementary. Snowden had access to systems letting him search and download files far beyond what his job required. NSA's internal security protocols, designed to prevent external hackers, failed to stop an insider from walking out. No robust audit system tracking who accessed what. Snowden wasn't a senior official. He was a contractor with moderately high clearance. Yet he accessed some of the most sensitive operational details of American signals intelligence. That access was granted based on a background check and the assumption cleared individuals could be trusted. The assumption was wrong. Surveillance programs were exposed and had to be modified or shut down. Relationships with allied intelligence services strained. Adversaries gained insights into American capabilities and adjusted communications accordingly. The operational cost, lost sources, burned methods, degraded ability to monitor threats. The NSA, an agency built on protecting information, had been compromised by a single individual with the right access and wrong intentions. Failure of vetting, of monitoring, of assuming technical security could replace human judgment. SolarWinds. December 2020. A cybersecurity firm discovered something alarming. Malicious code was embedded in software updates from SolarWinds, a company providing network management tools to thousands of organizations, including multiple U.S. government agencies. The hack had been active for months. Russian intelligence, specifically the SVR, had compromised the software supply chain, inserting a backdoor into updates that SolarWinds customers then installed. Once inside, attackers moved quietly, accessing emails, documents, internal systems. Victims included Treasury, Commerce, Homeland Security, and parts of the Pentagon. The full scope took months to assess. The intelligence community acknowledged it might never know everything accessed. This was a supply chain attack, targeting not the end user but the trusted software they rely on. Sophisticated, patient, difficult to detect. The attackers didn't break down doors. They walked in through updates organizations installed voluntarily, believing they were routine security patches. The intelligence failure was about imagination. The possibility of supply chain compromise was known in theory. Security experts had written about it. But practical defense steps, rigorous vetting of third-party software, continuous network behavior monitoring, were not uniformly implemented. SolarWinds exposed a hard truth: the next major attack may not involve explosions or gunfire. It may be silent, digital, undetectable until damage is done. This is the fifth domain of warfare, cyberspace. The United States is both the most capable attacker and one of the most vulnerable targets. The Kabul Collapse. August 15, 2021. Afghanistan's president fled the country. Within hours, Taliban fighters walked into the presidential palace in Kabul without firing a shot. 20 years of war, trillions spent, a government the United States built from scratch collapsed in days. American intelligence had predicted this. Sort of. Assessments varied. Some said the Afghan government could hold 6 to 12 months after U.S. withdrawal. Others said 90 days. A few said 30. Almost no one said 72 hours. But that's how long it took. The miscalculation was rooted in fundamental misunderstanding. Intelligence analysts looked at the Afghan National Army's equipment, training, numbers. On paper, a force of 300,000, equipped with American weapons, backed by American-trained officers. The Taliban had perhaps 75,000 fighters. What assessments missed was will. Afghan forces had equipment. They didn't have reason to die for a government that existed mostly on paper, paid them irregularly, was led by officials widely seen as corrupt. When the Taliban advanced, most units didn't fight. They negotiated, surrendered, or walked away. The intelligence failure was in assumptions. Analysts assumed military capability equals military performance. They assumed 20 years of training would produce loyalty to democratic government. They assumed Afghan forces would behave like American forces. None of those assumptions were tested rigorously against ground reality. When Kabul fell, scenes at the airport were chaotic. Afghans who worked with American forces tried desperately to get out. A suicide bomber killed 13 U.S. service members and over 100 Afghans at Abbey Gate. The collapse wasn't tactical intelligence failure. It was strategic. For 2 decades, the intelligence community reported on the war through metrics measuring activity, not outcome. It was failure of the questions asked. Not, can we train an Afghan army, but, will they fight? If you've followed these 80 years of failures, you've seen a pattern. These aren't just history. They're warnings about the present. The next failure is already forming. A warning being written that won't be read. Intelligence that won't be shared. An assumption that will prove catastrophic. The only question is whether anyone will be paying attention. Thank you very much for watching this video, and if you learned something, make sure to leave a like. Comment down below what types of videos you would like to see from me on this channel in the future, as I am interested in covering a large variety of topics. Anyways, thank you again and goodbye.